Hello, and welcome again to our continued celebration of the Pastel Society of America's 50th annual exhibition, Enduring Brilliance. My name is Karine Franco, and today I have the pleasure of introducing Jacob Aguiar. Jacob is a nationally recognized pastel artist living in Boxford, Massachusetts with his wife Laura, son Henry, and daughter Lucy. He splits his time between painting inspiring local landscapes and practicing naturopathic medicine. He has won many pastel awards, including 4 annual awards in Pastel 100 competitions and 3rd place overall in the prestigious Plein Air Salon. He has exhibited in galleries throughout the United States, including in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and in the Brinton Museum in Bighorn, Wyoming. A signature member of the Pastel Society of America, he teaches online through Patreon as well as at workshops throughout the country. In this demonstration, Jacob will take you through his process of painting dramatic light in the landscape. Utilizing a novel underpainting technique, Jacob will show us how to enhance drama in the landscape. Please welcome Jacob.
Welcome, everybody. So today I decided, against what I was going to initially do, I had a reference chosen from sort of local to where I am in New England, but I flew into Jackson Hole yesterday. And as you can see from this scene here, the lighting and the clouds were just spectacular. So I figured, why not paint a scene that I, just experienced yesterday? And I think it really holds to kind of the theme of the demo, which is painting dramatic light. This is an incredibly dramatic scene with these really sort of strongly lit clouds. This really beautiful blue back in the mountains, and then these a little bit darker, sort of orange and yellow, I think cottonwoods and maybe some aspens in here. So I figured this would be a perfect demo for this demonstration, perfect scene for the demonstration. And I did, as I often do, those of you who have seen me demonstrate before, or have taken a workshop, or are part of my Patreon group, that I often do these little color studies. And, it serves, several purposes for me. Probably the most important being it allows me to kind of select a color palette, or to sort of find a color palette to work from when I paint larger. So that's what this has allowed me to do. It's kind of allowed me to zero in on this nice kind of yellow creamy color for the light coming through behind those mountains. And that creates a nice, contrast in color temperature with that yellow and then this sort of more vibrant blue in front of it. So, that was just kind of a, quick little color study, convinced me that this is a scene worth painting larger. So that's what I'll do today. And I've marked off this area here. So this is 7.5 tall by 10 inches wide. It is on a smaller side. The reason I chose that is I think it's nice in demonstrations when artists can take a scene fairly close to a finish. If I were to work, much larger than this, even just like a 12 by 16, I'd probably get about halfway through. And you wouldn't really see, some of those finishing arcs or some of the finishing sort of use of color or edge work. So that's why I decided to go a bit small in this scene. And I think, I'm seeing it on my phone and it looks like it's a fairly good size. So hopefully that'll be good enough for you guys. So before I jump in, just talk quickly about underpainting. So I do 3 basic underpainting techniques, all wet pastel underpainting. So the first of which is what I'm going to use today, is a monochromatic underpainting. So I'll take this Create color. This is Payne's Gray. So it's a nice sort of grayish blue-violet color. And what I'll do is I'll basically create sort of a value map, and then I'll wet it with alcohol. And the idea with that is really just focusing on shapes and value relationships. And then I'll come in immediately with those colors from the scene and start applying them. So that's one underpainting technique that I use. The second one that I use is just essentially blocking in with the color I see in the scene. So I'll take maybe a pencil or a vine charcoal piece or even a pastel that's pretty close to the value of the paper, and I'll do a contour line drawing, and then I'll block in with the colors I see in the scene, wet that down with alcohol, and then paint directly over it. And I use that technique quite often. I find it, it helps me to soften all of my edges in that first stage. And then as I'm bringing the painting to a finish, I can really focus on selectively hardening edges, especially in centers of interest. Also, many colors, when they get wet with alcohol, will go a little bit darker. So it's almost like it provides a slightly darker base to then paint over the top of. And then the third technique that I use, which it probably could work well for this scene, but I've talked about it a lot. I feel like there's a higher rate of failure with it, is I will take a new pastel, pale vermilion, so 266p. I'll take that, block in the scene just like I would with this Payne's gray color. And before I wet it with alcohol, so I have the orange down as sort of a value map, then I'll apply the color that I see in the scene over the top of it, and then I'll wet that with alcohol. And what it does is it really warms everything in the scene, and it gives, even some nice like pinkish tone, because even though it's really on the orangish side, when it gets wetted and it sort of gets moved around, it actually gives a little bit of like a pink or reddish kind of tone to it. So that can provide a nice base to, again, work over the top with it. I'm not doing that today because, like I said, it has, I would say, a higher failure rate, and I'm not really looking forward to failing today. So I'm not going to do that technique. I would say I have the highest success rate using this monochromatic underpainting approach, because really, I'm not even thinking about color in that first step. And it's fun. I think it's really fun to take, one of these nice, large, flat synthetics and really, move that pastel around. So I'll go ahead, I'll jump in, I'll start blocking this scene in. And typically when I'm starting a painting, I look for a strong horizontal. So, horizon line is an area that I'll kind of start on. So I'm just coming in, showing where those slightly larger trees are on this right-hand side. And these provide a really nice balance to the larger trees on the left. So I want to make sure that I include, some of those trees over here. And I'll have to be sure to make this kind of back row of trees, which is pretty long. I'll have to make sure to make it interesting. It could very easily become very repetitive or very boring. So I'll do my best to ensure that that does not happen. In this Payne's gray that I have, it's a fresh new pastel, or sorry, Cretacolor. And I like having that fresh kind of hard edge, so I can come in and, start to indicate where some of the tree trunks and the branches will go. And I kind of block in pretty, I would say, angular at this point. I can, indicate foliage just by doing that. Another little tree here. And these two bunches of trees on either side, I feel like it frames this edge between the sky and the mountain really nicely. And that's going to be an important focal area for this scene. Indicating these over here. And then there's this mountain, kind of comes down. And this side, it does come up higher than this side. So I want to be sure, to capture that. And I'm not going to lay much of this pastel down area. I don't want that to go too dark. And then, down here in the ground, And I'll get more nuance of value once I start laying in the actual color of the scene, but I can just start to indicate a little bit of the variation, a little bit of the variety here. And strengthening that a little bit. And then in the sky, one of the challenges is going to be, and this is the challenge I experienced in doing that little study, a real challenge is going to be organizing these clouds. There's so much going on up here. Indicating where those shadow shapes of the clouds are. Okay. Indicating this foliage on this tree over here. And I think, this should have enough. I think it should have enough for this pastel to start moving it around. I'm happy, to answer any questions, especially, the underpainting process. That will, happen pretty quickly. Okay, so what I'm taking now, 70% isopropyl alcohol. I found in my studio that vodka works great for underpainting, but I didn't want to buy, a handle or a fifth of vodka just to do a couple paintings out here. But I have Tito's at home. My wife and I don't drink much, and I found Tito's works really, really well for underpaintings. It stays wet a little bit longer because of the water content, and I find that it creates some interesting like blooms. So if it's starting to dry and you take a little bit of that Tito's on a brush and you touch it, it just sort of blooms and spreads in all directions, like you might see in watercolor. That can happen a little bit with 70%, but I feel like it's not as pronounced. And then I pretty much never use 91% isopropyl, and that just dries way too quickly for me. So just have this is the top of a baby bottle. So I've been using this probably for about 4 years, since my son was born. It's plastic, lightweight, it works great. So that 70% isopropyl alcohol. And then this is just a large synthetic flat brush, which I like to use for the underpainting process. I can get, a variety of textures, using this kind of brush. I'll actually go ahead and start right in. If I was doing this with either of the other two processes that I talked about in underpainting, I would work light to dark. But with this, it doesn't really matter. There's really no issues with, with muddying the alcohol. It's all the same. And darkening these bottom edges a little bit kind of pushes the viewer into the scene.
Jacob, please
Yes.
tell us what surface are you using to paint on?
Oh,
please?
yeah. This is Lux Archival.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I should have said that. So it's Lux Archival. I'm classically a diehard UArt fan. I've had a little challenge here and there with UArt paper, so I am kind of branching out a little bit. I like Lux Archival. I'm learning how to work with it. With any material change, it sort of takes a minute to figure out how to best use it, and I think I'm starting to understand the paper pretty well. So yeah, it's Lux Archival, and then I dry mount. I dry mount to acid-free foam core. So I have a nice dry mount press at home that I use. So make sure this doesn't get too drippy. So I have a stash of Wallace Belgian mist at home. I had an attendee at one of my workshops in New Hampshire who knew of just a little local New Hampshire art supply store, kind of out there, and she had a stash of the 24 by 36 sheets of Wallace Belgian mist. So I snatched up a decent amount of that. I didn't want to use that today because it's impossible to find, and I didn't want to use a piece of paper that nobody could really find. I wanted to do a process that would translate well for people. So what's nice about this cloudy day is that a lot of the edges on this mountain became really, really soft, so that I can really choose selectively where I want those harder edges. And this is a natural area for those hard edges. So I've already kind of indicated that a little bit. And one thing I'm understanding with this Lux Archival is, it seems like it's a little bit more difficult to push the pastel around in the underpainting process. It does this when you're painting with the dry pastel as well, is that you put a mark down, it just kind of holds on. It doesn't allow it to sort of move around quite as much as, say, UArt did or does. But it has that could be considered a positive, but it has a lot of other positives as well. And not the least of which is working on true white from the beginning. I like having the ability to work on white. So okay, so that that works for me as kind of a map. And this will take a few minutes to dry, so this would be a great time if anybody has questions about this or anything at all, really. This would be a great time for it.
Jacob, we have a question from the chat.
Yes.
One of the attendants is wondering if you always do an underpainting.
I would say anytime I'm working this size, which is a 7.5 by 10 or larger, I do. I find otherwise, if I don't on a larger scene, I'm fighting the paper so much, it gets super frustrating. And especially with those other two underpainting techniques that I talked about, it really saves pastel. By being able to liquefy it and spread it around, you're not using up nearly as much of the pastel stick. This doesn't have that benefit because I am going to cover much of this up, but in the shadows, hopefully some of this violet ends up showing through as shadow color. Yeah. Yep. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question, which
Yes.
is, by doing this value map in your underpainting, do you find that you can dispense with doing thumbnails, or are you simply so incredibly experienced that you can dispense with doing thumbnails?
It's not that. It's not that. I actually utilize the color studies as almost like a combination thumbnail slash color study, because I find if a composition, you know, works well at this size, there's a pretty good chance it's going to work well larger. I still do no tans here and there. I do them definitely when I go outdoors and paint with the changing light. But when I'm painting, you know, indoors in the studio, I'm mostly doing these 6x6 or 6x8 color studies, and then basically working directly from that to paint larger.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think I can actually jump right in here. And oh no, it's a little bit wet still. I started in the ground, so maybe I can actually start working in the ground a little bit. So in the shadows and in the darks in the ground, I'm actually going to use a little bit of this Giraud green. There is a lot of green in these scenes, even though it's, you know, say, you know, predominantly, you know, golds and, you know, yellows and blues. I definitely see a fair amount of green. And being that it's a Giraud, it's dark enough to where it's not laying down a ton of pastel, so I'm not too worried about that. I can always go over it if I don't like the effect of the green. And then I'm letting the rest of this, you know, kind of dry a little bit. So I have an ochre color here, and these are just, you know, to reiterate, these are colors for the most part that I did use in that little study. So it did help me to start and to create a little bit of a palette to work from.
We have another question for you. Was the color
Sure.
study done from the reference photo or plein air?
It was done from the reference photo. Yeah, I was so caught up. I was, you know, driving around like a madman yesterday, trying to take as many photos as I possibly could. So I actually didn't get any painting done, but the rest of the week I do plan to get a decent amount of painting done.
I'd also like to let everybody know that Jacob will be teaching for the Pastel Society of America in fall of 2023 with the PSA Academy.
Yes. And it's an interesting program. It's I think it's a 6-week kind of ongoing study program, like 3 to 4 hours per session. And then there will be critiques and some sort of one-on-one feedback. That's part of it. So it should be a fun program.
So I have a question.
Yes.
On the paper that you're using, does it come in different grits? I'm not familiar with the name of the paper you're using.
Lux Archival, I do not think it comes in different grits. I believe you know, this is the only grit that it has. And I would say it's fairly comparable to a 400 grit, maybe 400, 500 grit, somewhere in that range. And I like it. I think it holds, you know, layers of pastel well. I would say I'm still kind of getting used to it because it doesn't behave like UArt does, which is fine. It doesn't need to. It doesn't have to be, you know, and it shouldn't be, you know, identical to UArt. But yeah, I'm just kind of really familiarizing myself with how it functions. But yeah, with the challenge with UArt, I really needed, you know, something else to kind of turn to. That's a bit too green, actually. There's this yellow that I will end up using, too yellow. And I should be able to now start, kind of working around the scene. And I wouldn't typically work, one area of the scene very far before I start kind of moving around. So I am going to, at this point, move around the painting a little bit. So I talked about this, this Giraud dark green. So I'm going to use that as a shadow color for some of these trees. And then I talked about that ochre color, which I think is a nice, again, kind of a nice dark in these trees, just to start to shift, starts to shift that violet color a little bit. Even though it's not the dominant color, especially in the back there. See it. I'll even start to put a little bit in the sky. Not a lot in the sky quite yet, because I do want to start to develop some of those other colors in the sky, but at least, if I get something down for these for this foliage, I can start to kind of work the sky back and forth with it, especially with use of sky holes. And in a scene like this, where there's so much kind of orange and kind of yellow, I'm cautious to slowly bring my color up in saturation. I don't want to just jump straight to all of those oranges and yellows. Okay.
Jacob, is that piece of blue tape underneath your painting there to catch your dust?
It is. Yep.
Very smart.
It's not what I have in my studio, but this is somebody else's studio, and I don't want to get it all pastel-y. So yes. Okay. So I want to actually bring in some of my sky color, because the sky really, as is often the case in landscape, it sets the light for the scene. And depending on how saturated the sky color goes, sort of helps me know how far to push the oranges down here.
Is that still a Giraud that you're using for the sky?
That was a Terry Ludwig.
Aha.
Yeah, really, really nice color. Kind of what I would say, there's a set, I think it's, mostly like, ultramarine and some cobalt type blues. That is really just my go-to for skies. Those Terry Ludwigs, I love them. So I put some blue down. Now I want to modify with a little bit of a violet, like a neutral violet, same value, because I see that violet warmth in these clouds as well. This is actually, I think, a Henry Rocher, which I have some of, but I try to use them pretty sparingly. wanted to use, actually, there's this other blue that I used in the study, which I think works as a nice kind of transition blue, kind of from those darkest blues that you see in the cloud shadow before it gets to the light color. Like this blue works really nicely there. And then I want to grab, I want to actually go ahead, even this early on, and bring, actually bring, that's a little bit dark. I want to bring some warmth into the sky. So it's not just all of these cools. And I could start to indicate a little bit of it down here. And I also see, so there's some warmth in the lights, and then there's some definitely a little bit cooler lights. That may not go quite light enough. Let's see, so this is kind of a violet color. That's, I'm learning there's a real problem in Jackson Hole with private jets, a whole lot of them coming in. So I think that's a private jet heading over. Okay. And then I want to start bringing in some of the lighter colors, lighter values into the trees. So I just have that, that ochre color there, which works well. But it needs, I need to start, lightening, adding a little bit more color saturation. And once I have a little bit of this in, I could start working on the mountain color. And that mountain color, where it interacts with these sort of the color of the foliage in front of it, is really, I would say it's kind of the highlight of the painting. That and this edge here, those are both two, really important aspects of the painting. So I want to get some of that mountain color in. That's the one area that I haven't really touched yet. That's a little bit of a darker color. And then, a darker, more neutral color. And there's some really nice variation in the color in the mountains. So this would be, a lighter value that's also still, I would say, still fairly neutral. And there's a few sky holes. But I want to make sure that that color, it really needs to go saturated enough. So for instance, this color here, like I definitely see this color in the scene. And then with that darker blue, that neutral color, I feel like I can go a little bit darker in some of these areas in the blue. And you can tell, by the way that I'm painting, I mean, I kind of sneak up on a finish. I'm not, I don't use super, graphic marks for the most part. If I do, it's usually towards the end when I feel like, okay, I have a really good base for the scene. Now I can come in and put some of those really nice, again, graphic and kind of, more solid, kind of interesting marks. But right now, I still have a fair amount of paper coming through that I need to start, covering up. So that's kind of the focus here. Let's see. That's too neutral. Want something a little more saturated. So the color has to go more saturated up here, but I don't want it to read as a sky color. That to me reads as a sky color rather than a mountain color. I wonder if this might work a little better. No, that reads as sky too. Let's see. I need something. I almost wonder if I can use the same. And the same color that I have here. Sorry, I think someone's trying to call my phone. And then I'm seeing some nice, kind of violets. And this violet's really kind of softening these edges on the mountain. Just gonna take my finger, get a little bit of that paper covered a bit better. So I'm really, for the most part, I am, working from dark to light. And it often feels like kind of like it's, you're kind of putting a puzzle together to some extent. And, each piece is sort of a step up in value. And this, it's kind of a nice, warm green color. I definitely see that in a bit of those background trees. I want to sharpen up that back edge a little bit. That shadow edge on the bottom of these trees is important for me. All right, so I'm just kind of squinting down. There's a blue that I used up here that I don't know if I can identify it again in my palette. Typically, when I'm doing a color study, I set those pastels to the side, but for this, using somebody else's studio, I didn't really have the opportunity to do that. So let me look here. One second. I wonder if I could go, I see some violet in here. Just see how this violet color works. Yeah, I think that violet's nice. I'm just using a little bit different blue color here. And I'm saving that last bit there, to do that towards the end. That is really a kind of a finishing piece. So, there's this nice kind of dark hill here. What I want to indicate. So that's a pretty saturated violet color. So I put that in and I can come in and modify it a bit with the blue. Now I'm going into my new pastels, which I use new pastels a lot in my paintings. I find I can get, a little bit more refined edge, refined mark making with them. I can, create some soft edges like this here. And I want to come back in, I want to recreate some of the tree trunks, some of the branches. So I can do that with, you know, a number of different tools. This is probably, I think, a Great American. A pretty warm color. And I'm not drawing it in, you know, solid. I'm really using kind of a, what I call sort of hit or miss kind of mark, where, you know, it's a broken, it kind of has a broken edge. It's not a solid tree trunk or a solid branch. But to say, this is kind of weird doing a demo where there's no questions. Are you guys still there? Okay, all right, just wanted to make sure. So this is a warmer, sorry, what's that?
I said, we're here.
Okay, good. This is a little bit warmer violet color, which I do see, you know, in some of these shadow areas of these trees. Could probably even put a little bit in this one. And this could work nicely, I think, as a little bit darker value down here too. And now what I'm going to do, I use these new pastels quite a lot. And, you know, I see some spots, for instance, where if I want to clean up, that's a little bit too vibrant, you know, clean up a little bit of this mountain in behind and create some, what are the equivalent of sky holes. You know, I can take this new pastel, which is a slightly darker value than the mountain. I can start to incorporate that. And I appreciate that I can get, you know, an interesting mark with this. Likewise over here. Kind of using this to negative paint behind these trees. And the painting, I think, should start to really come together once I can really start creating my edges. You know, again, I'm kind of working really sort of incrementally and slowly, bringing it closer and closer to a finish. And that edge work should start to happen fairly soon here. I'm trying to get enough variety in the ground there. Otherwise, it could feel very, very flat. So I actually see, you know, it's lighter on this side, a bit darker on this side. So maybe I want to, you know, kind of emphasize that a little bit more. And just kind of using a new pastel. Okay, so I'm going to spend a little bit more time in the sky now. It's been a little bit neglected here. And I feel like I can, let me just see if I can selectively bring a little bit more neutral color, saturated color in. Ooh, that's way too much. And I do need to use, let's see if this color will work. I just want to clean up the shapes of these over here, so they don't feel just like they're one, big massive trees or one big massive foliage. There is, some definition between them. So I'm just using a new pastel again. It's indicating, some of these tree branches and tree trunks without them being, too dark. Don't want it to be too contrasty. I'm thinking I can bring, this color that I used in some of the background. And use it on this tree a little bit. Okay, spend a little bit more time up in the sky. So this is generally how I work. I'm kind of moving my way around the scene, trying to bring it up, together. And what I need to do, which this would be a good time, is to really start to lay in those lights in the clouds in the sky. So I'm going to jump back in. I mentioned this. I'm going to grab another one. Get a cooler light. And I want to be careful that these shapes don't mimic each other. And I also want to be careful that this hump isn't a mirror reflection of that. Now I want to go ahead and use some of my lightest lights in the sky. Because it is really what this scene needs.
Jacob, do you ever
Yeah.
feel bored when you're doing the larger painting because you have already done a study that was spontaneous?
I would say for the most part, the study doesn't, usually isn't saying, well, sometimes the study will say everything that needs to be said, but for the most part, it doesn't. And so I still find there's lots that I can explore typically in a larger scene. So it does happen, but I would say for the most part that's not the case. But even having said that, there are plenty of times where I like the study better than a larger painting. That definitely happens. And then I have this yellow, I think it is a Diane Townsend. I'm kind of softening those edges. And then I can take this and this and kind of emphasize where some of these lightest areas are in the clouds. Oops, it almost fell right out of my hand. And while I see a lot of this really kind of lighter and warmer color in the clouds here, I don't really see it in those clouds back there. So I don't want to, put this everywhere for that reason. I'm going to take a step back. I haven't done that yet. All right. So it's starting, I think it's starting to read. And I want to be careful. I don't, my tendency ideally is to leave things a little bit on the looser side. So basically I've laid in foliage for that tree, but I've actually spent very, very little time painting it. I'm kind of using the sky, the negative paint around it to give it its shape. And I could put some I didn't like that. Did not like that. I didn't like that mark because then it kind of makes it feel too kind of regular and symmetrical around it. So I'm going to come in and use, again, a sky color. Okay. And as I'm thinking now about, kind of orchestrating the scene, I want to think about how the viewer is being led through. So ideally, the viewer comes in, I think, from this corner. I can just put just a few kind of detail marks, not much. So ideally, the viewer comes in from this corner. Comes over to this tree. And then I can take maybe even a little bit more saturated blue. That's not too saturated. And kind of come up here, and I wonder, this might be too much, but I wonder if I can create a little bit of an edge here. That kind of brings you over here. And I'm gonna just lighten this hill a little bit there. And I've spent so little time kind of on those background trees. I should probably spend more time there. Take one more step back. I think I can strengthen some of these shadows in the sky and the clouds. Really, once I've gotten some color in that tree, I'm just almost strictly negative painting to give it a shape. And if I can emphasize a little bit of these darks. Now, I don't want to go too far with the darks, but I think it needs a little bit more. And definitely soften a bit more in clouds and in sky than I do in other areas of the painting. That's just kind of the, it's the quality and the nature of that part of the painting. So I'm not worried about that too much. I mean, I still, you still want it to read as the same artist doing, the whole painting, but a little bit of softening in the sky should be okay. And this actually has a little bit more yellow in it. Take another step back.
Do you at some point stop looking at your references, being your photograph and your your preliminary sketch and just go with your gut?
Well, it's kind of a combination. I mean, I'm looking back mostly to the to the references is really more about like shapes of things, and if I like the shapes of them, really keeping that in mind. But in terms of like my color choices, I think I'm more responding to what I'm seeing, like in my painting and what that actually needs. But my eyes are always just sort of darting around. I think I could bring a little bit more color over here. And there's, I'd say even a little bit more on kind of like the red side. This is, you know, in the whole scheme of things, maybe it's a little bit kind of more on the neutral side of red, but I see it just sort of interspersed. I don't want to use too much of it though. Definitely have too much of a good thing. Okay. Want a pretty soft edge towards that outer part of the scene. And this would be a good time if I had it to, try to create a little bit of a border around it so I could see a little bit better, what's going on without the kind of messy edge. I don't know if that worked. Just kind of using my finger to create a little bit, like my fingernail to create a little bit of a texture. Ooh. Didn't like that. So when I touched it, it sort of dragged a little bit of that sky color, that really light sky color, down into the mountain. So I just needed to clean that up. This is, another new pastel. A little bit of a kind of warmer, kind of brownish red color, which I think works quite well with just kind of the color harmony that's happening in the painting right now. It's bringing warmth, but it's not terribly saturated. I'm just kind of going over some of these oranges and yellows that I feel like are a little bit too much. I wonder if I actually take a really fresh new pastel. And this is a, a really light yellow. I feel like I can still lighten that value back here a little bit on that top edge of the ground. And this may be, I think this is probably too light. I'm just going to see what happens. Just scumble a little bit over some of these trees. I want to be careful that those background trees, that there's variety and interest, but that they don't become like completely disorganized, because that can happen too if there's just so much happening in them, and that's not really, it's not really necessary. That was a Giro, so it survived. But let me take another step back here. If I feel like that top edge here, I feel like is a bit strong. Just bringing, this is like a hog hair bristle brush. Just using that brush to kind of soften that top edge a little bit. All right, I think, this is kind of at that stage where as I'm spending, time on it, I'm kind of hitting, I feel like, where there's diminishing returns in what I'm doing. And when that's the case, it can be a good time to sort of stop, put it away, give it some time. I am feeling we could just put a little bit more, of a dark accent in a few areas in the ground. Just putting a couple more detail marks in. And this part of the sky, I feel like it could be, a little bit warmer. All right. Yeah, I'm not sure that there's too much more to do at this point. Any other questions, kind of as I'm coming kind of closer to a finish?
I kind of feel like your focal point is different than the one in your sketch. Because in your sketch, I kind of go to that yellow spot in the back field to the left. But in your finished painting, I'm going right to those smaller painting trees on the right.
Oh, my natural tendency is to want to come to this hard edge here.
Mhm.
So that's the intention is this, and that's why I kind of went in and softened some of this. I mean, this is all kind of together there, and even in that study, the idea was to bring it back here. I mean that I didn't reuse that color partially because it felt like it was a little bit too strong, but the idea is really to bring the viewer back to that edge.
It's true, I do go there. I was focused on the trees.
Well, and part of it too can be, oh shoot, the way a camera can emphasize certain things too. I feel like a lot of like phone cameras, everything goes really warm typically, and so I almost wonder if it's pushing this a bit warm, like a bit warmer than it is, which is kind of drawing the eye even more.
Yeah, it looks very orange. There's at least on my computer.
It's decently orange. There's no doubt about it. But value-wise, I feel like the value of that orange is very, very similar to the value of the blues around it. So when I squint down, what I'm seeing mostly is, again, kind of that hard edge. And so you may be, sort of drawn more to that more intense color. And I'm kind of seeing more the value contrast and the hard edge there.
I agree with the last person. The orange on the lowest spot of those trees on the right is really strong. Yes, right there.
Mhm.
When you put that in, that's where my eye went.
I can see that. Well, this is all kind of together there. So that works.
It does work. Your light on the mountains and the edge of it does get your eye, but I feel like the first thing you go to is that orange, then you pop up to the light area, I think.
Well, that actually works fine, to be honest. I mean, I talked about softening this a little bit. I talked about trying to come across, come up, and then I feel like you can sort of come across here, and then maybe you come up across here, down here, over here, and then up. But that's totally fine. There's nothing says you have to have like a single focal area, and typically you would have a couple different areas of interest. And so to me, this sort of functions as another area of interest with some of these harder edges of the tree branches, some of these pops of color here, and then some of these sort of marks here, to me, sort of pulls the eye over here and then kind of head back across there.
It definitely works.
Anything else? Any other comments or questions or concerns? That's what I tell my patients in my appointments. But yeah, any concerns?
Hi, Jacob.
Hi.
Someone asked in the chat if it's possible, could you show us your color palette when you finish? Did you save all those together, the ones you used?
They are for the most part. Yeah, I can do that. I would have to basically tilt the phone down. Like I'd have to move the phone to show it.
Okay.
If that's okay with you guys, yeah, I can do that.
Thanks.
Sure. Is that somebody that I know? Do I know that voice?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, all right. Sounded familiar. So here.
Yes, that's nice, yeah.
And then coming across.
You did the color study first, so do you typically pick out your color palette before you begin a painting?
No, actually, so the color study is when I basically settle on a palette. And then once I have a palette for my color study, that usually makes up a good bit of the palette in the when I work it up larger. But I don't pre-select before the color study. Any other comments or questions?
We have a couple from the chat.
Sure.
One person wants to know, do you always work in a custom size and cut the board after you paint a scene?
No, I would say I typically, so again, for demonstrations, I work about this size, but if I'm painting in my studio, I typically cut them down to like 9x12s, 12x12s, 12x16, 18x18. Like those are kind of my standard sizes. I just sort of, made this a little bit smaller, more for the purpose of the demonstration.
Can I ask why you decided on dry mounting as your preferred way of doing it?
I find that it's the most predictable surface to work on. Like if I'm using 3/16 inch acid-free foam core, I actually had an issue with the Jerry's foam core, and I've switched to another one, and it's perfectly predictable, and the surface is always consistent. If I'm hopefully I'm going to frame a lot of paintings that I'm painting on, I prefer to mount beforehand than to say mount it afterwards. And I like, even though it's a subtle thing, I find that if I tape a piece of paper to a board, the paper doesn't lay perfectly flat on the board. There's actually a little bit of air between it. And I feel like it's a little bit less responsive. I feel like I feel the paper first, and then the mark goes down once it sort of touches the board. So I like knowing that if I, when I touch the pastel to the paper, like it's a solid surface to work on.
Right. Okay. So have you used any other where you have like a sheet of glue, a sheet of it that's not dry mounting? Have you tried any other ways, or is this just your go-to?
I've done some other ways, and I always found the paper rippled and buckled after I painted. Or if I did a wet underpainting, I often found the paper would start to come off the surface, and that just got super frustrating. So for me,
and you don't have that issue at all with the dry mounting. I get it.
Never. Yeah.
Okay.
Once.
That's great.
And I've been dry mounting for 6 years probably, and not a single time has that happened. Before I would use some different sprays that I tried.
Right.
I haven't used I know there's is it Art Graphics that makes a sticky paper, and I know some people, I think Alan Picard, I think it's Art Graphics. I know some artists use it and really swear by it. It's just, I have a dry mount press, so I use it.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I tried the 3M, which I think Alan had recommended. And the edges of the paper just peeled up all the time. So didn't work for me.
Yeah. It can be frustrating. I found my dry mount press on Craigslist. So the surface, the plate is like 24 by 36, I think. So what I do is I either dry mount 24 by 24s or 24 by 32s on acid-free foam core, and then I just cut that down to the sizes I need. And it saves me a ton of money versus like buying pre-mounted paper.
Right. Okay, one other question. So you've decided on this the paper you use today versus UArt, and I see a bunch of stuff in the chat about people liking both. I've used both, but I abuse the UArt like crazy, and that's what I love about it. Can you abuse this Lux the same way?
I don't know. I kind of abuse my paper. But so what's happened to me is a lot of the UArt that I have in rolls is not a high quality. The actual surface is not what I'm used to painting on. And I went through probably mounting 12 or 16 of those large pieces of UArt paper to foam core to only then find out that the paper wasn't what I expected it to be. So I'm
Yeah.
kind of working with them to get some better quality rolls as replacements. So whereas with this, like this is very predictable at this point. And I don't know why it seems like so many of the good paper manufacturers end up having issues with their production at various times. I know that happened to Wallace, and I feel like it's happening to UArt a little bit.
It happened to me with UArt as well. That's why I tried the Lux, but I'm back to UArt just because it takes the abuse I give it.
Maybe that's not a good thing. No. So I so prefer UArt. Like that has been my tried and true paper for so many years. But the last couple batches have not been up to the normal quality. And so I really just out of necessity had to look elsewhere. And I would say I'm still not 100% sold on the Lux Archival. I can definitely tell a difference with how the pastel goes down, how, you know, at this point, like this mark that I made, let's say this, like it pretty much does not move. Whereas with UArt, if I make that mark, I can really go in and adjust it and modify it, soften it, you know,
Right.
much easier than I can on this paper.
I think that's because you're not supposed to use your fingers on the Lux Archival. I just made a comment of that. It will kill your fingers at the end. It's rougher. It's a little
is
more
true.
like Mickey Wallace.
Yeah, it's tough paper. It's definitely tough paper. I mean, yeah. And, you know, and I find too with the Lux Archival, what I'm finding is I'm quickly sort of hitting a point where I feel like I'm layering just fine, and then it sort of fills the tooth. Whereas with UArt, I feel like I've worked with it so much, like I know when I'm sort of hitting that point. Whereas with the Lux, I feel like I'm overshooting it sometimes and filling the tooth, and then it gets a little bit muddier. But that probably just is going to come with more time painting with it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else? I know we still have, you know, a little bit of time here.
Could I ask Jacob, what kind of stand do you have for your iPad holder?
Well, this is actually not mine. This is the woman whose studio I'm using. But there is, my phone is being held up by a really nice stand as well. Let me see if I can find the name of it. I actually got the idea from an artist who was in one of my workshops, and you know, it's something you buy off of Amazon, and I actually don't even know that it has a name on it. But it's nice. So this one here is pretty heavy duty. It has casters on the bottom, probably weighs about 10 pounds. The one that I'm using for my phone probably weighs about 2 pounds. So I feel like it's really nice to travel with.
So I'd like to ask, when you frame, do you use a spacer, and also what kind of glass do you use?
I don't use spacers now. That's what I used to use. And I've gone more to framing directly against the glass, just because I've had paintings really damaged in transit when I was using the spacer. And because I don't use any fixative, you know, in travel, what I found was, you know, if you have a painting that's laying flat on a truck, and I think it was actually coming home from IAPS one year, the painting, I think just from the vibration of the truck, the pastel spread everywhere, like all the colors started migrating. So I started framing directly against the glass for that reason.
So do you use museum glass, or what type of glass do you usually use?
It depends. I use some museum. I use, I think, TrueView AR70 as well. I like that paper, or that glass, I mean. It's still high quality, but it's, you know, a fraction of the cost of the museum glass. I think as time has gone on and, kind of the price point of my paintings increase, I'm getting into some different galleries. Like I'm going for the nicer and nicer glass because I can justify it. If you're selling, if you're selling a 9x12 for, I don't know, let's just say $200 through a gallery, and the gallery takes, 40%, you're left with 120, and then you pay $40 for a frame, you're left with 80, and then $20 for the glass, you're left with $60. So I think you just have to really balance out, what you're able to charge for your work with the type of, frames and glass you use.
Yes, I agree with that. So when you when you frame right directly on the glass, do you seal the glass or just make sure it's tightly pressed together?
I do. Yep, I seal it with framers tape.
Okay.
And and I learned that from Richard. I feel like if you don't do that, then there's real risk of moisture getting in.
Okay, thank you. That's
Yeah,
helpful.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Anything else? No? Okay. I don't know. What do you think, Corey? If there aren't any other questions or comments.
Jacob?
Yes.
Adrian, I have a question.
Yes.
Do you ever go back in with a little bit of alcohol? Like at this point, would you ever do that? I'm just curious if you ever do that.
I would say I never did on UArt because I felt like I always had tooth to work with. It could be something I would consider doing on this paper if I felt like I was starting to reach that saturation point. I would not be opposed to doing that. So yeah, I would definitely be open to it. It's just I really haven't at this point.
Jacob, this is Susan Story. I just want to thank you on behalf of PSA for doing the presentation today for everyone, and I thank everyone for joining us. It was
absolutely
wonderful to see you work.
Okay, yeah, thank you. No, it's my pleasure, and thanks for being, persistent with me. I know I've been hard to nail down, but
one must be persistent with you. But I appreciate that you're very busy. I understand.
Well, no, that is changing though. So, I'm just going through a big transition right now, but yes, that will, hopefully that'll level out here shortly, but yeah, thank you. Okay, well, what do you think, Susan? Should
I think it's time to say farewell and thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you all.
Susan. Yep, take care, everybody.